Can you imagine if you did a side-by-side, like my level of preparation when I speak?
I know. Amy writes speeches. She rewrites and pores over them.
Cries.
Rewrites them. And I show up and say stuff.
You used some interesting vocabulary yesterday. I don't know what word, but I was like, I didn't know he knew that word. It was really I'm serious. Yeah. It was a very rare, unusual word.
I remember saying something where I was like, oh, Amy's gonna give me shit about that.
No, I loved it. I just was like, huh.
This speaks to Amy's impression of me. Amy will say, oh, did you know that word before you met me? Like, Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Miss Fancy Pants over here. I'm Eric Barden.
I'm Amy Barden.
And this is Bombardened. Today we are speaking with Amy King. We'll have two Amy's in the house.
That's right. She's the better Amy, you will see. I met her, I think, first because I got really fascinated with Weld, the nonprofit that provides wraparound support for folks exiting, usually homelessness or the carceral system. And then she spun that off. It's peer-led now, and she is the CEO of Pallet. And Pallet, you can set up these villages. It's prefabricated tiny houses, basically. And what I really want to talk to her about today is her experiences with different municipalities. She works and partners at every level of government, often providing these villages after a natural disaster, like in the Carolinas, or before a winter storm's going to hit. And I've seen just enough in different cities to realize it really is different everywhere you go. It depends on the leadership. It depends on their level of urgency. How much red tape is there in place? How much regulation is in place? So that's what I want to ask her about.
It's really fascinating. People have this sense that you elect somebody and the electeds go in and what the elected ran on is going to be policy and it's going to be how we move forward. And then there's this hidden thing behind the scenes where the department directors and the assistant directors and the upper management of these different departments within the city stay the same through different administrations. And so they are resistant to change. They think in terms of what pays the bills, right? Like, what programs are going to get funded under this new administration? And they will tweak what they're doing to meet the financing requirements. Yeah. But they have ownership in the way it was done before. And so it is interesting. As somebody who comes at this from a community perspective who is trying to tap into resources within government to fund these programs, it'll be interesting to see what she has to say about bureaucratic resistance, because it's a real thing.
I believe she was in D.C. last week, so we can get an update there too.
Well, that's the home of bureaucracy.
Yep, mothership.
One of the things that they're talking about in the new Trump administration is this battle between electeds and the bureaucrats. And so it's getting a lot of airtime right now. So this is a very timely conversation. But ours is going to be focused more on state and local governments versus the federal government. But I think the tenets that make it intransigent, cross those boundaries.
Yeah. I was reflecting the other day that if I had heard all the rhetoric nationally about bureaucrats and bureaucracy, I think 10 years ago, I would not have known what to think about it. I had never been around government at all.
Now you work in government.
Now I work in government. Yeah, but I definitely understand the criticisms.
Yeah. So personally, we have experienced the impacts of bureaucracy as well. I mean, one of the things that I know in police work is, leadership comes and goes. And the officers know that they're going to be there for the long haul. So the attitude can be, this is my new boss, but I'm going to outlast my new boss. They're going to be here. I'm going to be here long after they're moved on to something else. And so I can just kind of give it, a little bit of FaceTime, a little bit of lip service, and keep doing what I'm how I want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember the first police roll calls I did, feeling that the skepticism, because I was saying, no, the council supports you. This council supports you. And they were like, ha.
Yeah.
And then I understood more about historical context, how quickly people change
Well,
positions.
I think that even if they believe that for a minute, they believe that it's fleeting.
Yeah.
And it is proven to be fleeting over the years. And it ebbs and flows. The support for law enforcement ebbs and flows basically on the daily, given whatever the current news is. Folks that are pro law enforcement spin on a dime, and they're no longer pro law enforcement as soon as the narrative and the headlines change. And we've seen that never more so than 2020, 2021. But I think it was just highlighted for everybody what law enforcers feel all the time. Yeah. All right, let's get bombarded. Well, welcome, Amy King. Thank you so much. We have the two Amy's here today.
Amy squared.
This
is going to be a lot of feelings.
Yeah,
a lot of opinions.
I'm a little outnumbered.
Yeah.
Right now.
I want to travel around with this Amy and just like nod approvingly when she talks. That is how and there's not that many people I feel that way about.
That's nice. Thank you.
Indiscriminately. Yeah. So I think I first met you because of Weld. I think I got all fascinated with Weld and then the origin story of Weld.
Yeah.
And so we talk about that, but then also Pallet, right? Yeah. One thing leads to the next. So why don't you, for the viewers, just say a thing about Weld and because you weren't really in a charitable space before, were you?
No.
Yeah, okay. All right. So let's talk about that and then Pallet, how that came to be.
Sure, yeah. So both of those organizations started at the same time, actually.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And they were both born out of our construction company, which was called Square Peg. We have wound that down as of now, but in favor of the other two.
That's cool. I didn't actually know that.
Yeah. So Square Peg, my husband's a builder.
Yep.
Square Peg was the first company, and we started very much by accident employing people coming out of the justice system. Those folks, many of them were unhoused and could not get into shelter because of their criminal histories and backgrounds. Some of them lived with us. Some of them I would spend each afternoon trying to get them into shelters. We co-signed leases with them to get them to apartments. We were doing whatever we could to get our staff into housing because they were operating heavy machinery and doing construction. And we were like, you have to sleep at night.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not very safe.
Yeah.
And so we really learned very quickly that a criminal history or access with the justice system, into the justice system, how it impacted other parts of people's lives.
Right.
And so both Pallet and Weld were born out of learnings from that.
Yeah.
So we started, Weld actually started because we were trying to get people into housing. We had a developer that we were working with and kicking squatters out of his properties. And I said, hey, I have a really crazy idea. You have an empty house. I have people who need a place to live. They're going to live in your house. I'll make sure they're good neighbors.
Yeah.
And we're just going to see how that goes. And he was very nervous, but he agreed to it.
Yeah.
That's how the first Weld house was born.
That is so cool.
And then we did it 2 more times after that with that same developer. And then I went to the city actually with my attorney in tow and was like, I'm here to turn myself in. I'm probably violating a tenancy law and I'm aware of it. But also, I just did some research and there's like 625 vacant properties like this in Seattle. And I think we could actually do something here. And they came to the table and helped me write some legislation to expand the program that is now Weld.
Wow.
So that's really how Weld started out of like, I have a problem, you have a problem, let's smash our problems together and create some solutions.
What year was that?
That was in 2016.
Okay, so you've covered a lot of ground. And one of the things I really admire and I'm also kind of fascinated by is you have kids.
I do.
You have kids at home.
Yes.
And so, again, Eric calls me delusional often because I'm just not, he does. It's documented now. But I just always feel like people are people, you know, generally you get trained to understand who's actually trying to change their lives, you know, who is on a trajectory, what that looks like. And I generally feel safe, you know, that we are trying to move forward and that you can tell the difference.
Yeah, for sure. And people thought we were crazy. I mean, I have an 18-year-old and 12-year-old now, but at the time when we were doing this, they were much younger. I had 2 small girls in my house.
Yeah.
And there were people, I mean, our own family members that were like, you guys are crazy. You're exposing your daughters to men, mostly, who have criminal histories. And I was like, my kids love these guys. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
They're great. They're funny. They're great with the kids. My kids call them uncle. I mean, there's a few of them still that they are connected with. They talk to them on the phone. They're with them all. And those guys have kids of their own. Like, it really doesn't preclude you from being a part of something just because you have a criminal history. So I won't get on my soapbox, but yeah.
Well, when what I've heard from people is being trusted means so much.
So much.
That this woman doesn't think that I'm a threat to her
Exactly.
kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting to have Eric all the time on this, on the other side in this recovery space to meet the Patricks and the Carolyns and to realize anybody could be. I mean, they're specifically talented, but generally people can change.
Oh, yes.
Well, people can change, and I mean, it's fantastic that they called you uncle and what, but I like from the other perspective, the family is well intentioned when they're telling you, like, are you exposing your kids to danger here? Because, like, one of the best indicators of criminal activity is past criminal activity. Sure. So, I mean, like, if we're thinking about like statistics and odds here at all, like. Also, and I'm going to talk on both sides of this equation because the reality of it is also that everybody that we talk to who has changed their life and is on a different trajectory now than they have been previously when they were in and out of the justice system, purpose and meaning and value and self-respect, all of those things are critical and crucial to that change. And so having somebody believe in you and have somebody trust you enough to have their kids around, that's real. That's human. Yeah. That's an emotion that helps to drive the change that people need to make. I'm curious, did you vet folks at all? Like, what was the vetting process? Like, I mean, I could cite examples where you like wouldn't have this person in your home. You wouldn't have this person with this type of, child predator you're not going to have in your home, right? Sure. So, I mean, there's some process to risk mitigation.
For sure.
How did that look?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. I mean, there are certainly not every experience we've had along this journey, and we've been in touch with tens of thousands of people across the country who have histories. Yes, it's not all rainbows and unicorns and butterflies. And we've certainly had very few, but a few little scary moments of like, ooh, this is actually kind of a scary person. So I'm not going to say that doesn't exist because it does, and you have to be careful about it. Right. The way we vetted it, well, I'll back up and say the first 5 people that we met, there was zero vetting. We didn't actually know they had a criminal history. And like I said, we started very much by accident employing people from the justice system. There's a shortage of construction workers in this country. Still, there was back then, even more so. And we met some folks through a mutual friend who needed work, and we started working with them. And my husband was like, I love these guys. They're great. Mm-hmm. They're fun. They're funny. They're great hard workers. And we ended up offering them jobs without even running background checks on them, which I come from the healthcare sector. Like, that's just a standard. You have to run background checks on everybody. But this is a construction company. So I thought, all right, well, if he's not going to do it, we won't do it. And then we kind of moved down the road and said, all right, well, now Elle and I, and we're doing all the things with the state, and we got to do this stuff. We got to get some background checks. And I was like, oh God, these guys have crazy backgrounds. And I didn't know it was there. Yeah. So that was the difference maker, was like, I knew the person before I knew their background. There you go. And that was the difference. And so we learned from that and said, as we meet people, we just want to sit down and be face-to-face and say what happened. And with all of our hiring practices, I mean, Pallet, more than 80% of Pallet's workforce comes from the justice system, addiction recovery programs, and homelessness. All of them have something really significant in their past. What I can say is 100% of them will sit down with me in my office if I ask them to and tell me what they did, why they did it, how they got there. If they're not willing to go through that process, then that's a different person, ready. Different story. Yeah. But 100% of them are like, look, this is what happened to me. Yeah. This was my response to that. And I don't approve of those decisions now. I regret those decisions now, but here I am, and I'm ready to make a change.
So absolutely, there's no benefit to anyone, society, business, the person who's committed crimes, the person who has been the victim of crimes. There's no benefit to anyone to, once somebody commits a crime and they have a criminal history, that we never employ them again. They can't really move on with their life. That's antithetical to rehabilitation and to reentry and those kinds of things. One of the things that we want to talk with you about, and we want to hear the Pallet side too, because we heard a little bit about Weld, want to hear about Pallet, but also just give the folks watching this an idea of how much this has grown. Mm-hmm. Because when we start talking about bureaucracy and sort of the red tape and like the system and waste and efficiency and those kinds of things, your background and the breadth of your experience is going to be really critical to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these are all the big issues, serious issues. I mean, we have a ton of experience with this. It's been now a decade, essentially. We started Square Peg in 2014. And then the other companies were kind of born out of that in 2016. We have worked all over the country. So Pallet, you asked about Pallet. Pallet, basically we make panelized shelter systems for people displaced by homelessness and natural disasters. But we are first and foremost a workforce development organization. So we're based in Everett. More than 80% of our staff come from this lived experience. We have, as a byproduct of that, built these cool shelter systems that deploy in an hour. We can set up shelter communities in a matter of a day and get people sheltered and connected with services right away. We currently have 135 shelter sites in 120 cities and 31 states across North America. We're also in 3 provinces in Canada. We have touched hundreds of thousands of lives of homeless people across North America over the last 8 years, which is amazing and incredibly difficult, like more hard than I could even explain to you how hard this road has been. We have been clawing our way to success for 8 years, and we're still not there.
It's so wild. So again, I arrived in this space 2 years ago. And by month 3, I was like, oh, this is fun and easy. Like, we got this village here, we got this, you've got space, and the bureaucracy. It is unbelievable to me. I can look at what we spend on our, response, right, to homelessness. We are spending more moving people around than it would take to get everybody into housing, that stabilization piece.
Right.
And I think that's the other thing people don't understand. And it's outreach workers that I've been out with who help me to understand that it takes a minute sometimes. So disaster response is one thing, but if I have somebody who's chronically unhoused, right, and especially women who are being assaulted and their trauma is being compounded, you can't just take that person and go, here's a house. Here's a good luck. It does not work. And so it's absolutely frustrating to me that we know what does work. We've got models that work, whether we're talking about reentry or entry into housing, and we're not doing them.
Right.
And it's been interesting to travel to different cities too. I was in Denver. I visited a pallet village in Denver, but I talked to that mayor and I was like, this is an interesting person, right? Yeah. Because he was like, Amy, it's Denver. It was winter. People were going to freeze outside. I was going to bring them in. Yeah. I mean, he had absolutely no regard, as far as I could tell, for the debate, right? About what is the ideal housing. It's just like, I'm not going to let you freeze.
Right.
And so 1,400 folks, as I understand, brought inside.
Yes. Yeah. Which, if you think about it, at the end of the day, sometimes simplifying things is the best way to a solution. That's how Pallet was born out of that too, right?
Yeah.
Are our structures perfect and beautiful and cute and sexy? No, not at all. They're simple and cheap and easy to use. Why? Because we're saving lives. And you're absolutely right. And I think the reality of the situation that we face today, and I'm saying this a lot more now than I used to, because it's true and we need to say it more, housing and homelessness are 2 separate issues. In this country, we have merged the 2 together.
Wow.
And this is the bureaucracy is built around this, right? We have created this narrative, which I'll be honest, was brought forth by lobbying firms who said, we have developers who want to build housing. So we've merged the 2 issues of homelessness and housing so we can build more housing. And we've funneled billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into housing that nobody can access and people can't sustain.
It's shocking to me that you insinuate that money has anything to do
with I know. How could I possibly?
You're shattering my view of the world.
Right? I know.
Yeah, it is. I get very frustrated about that too. A couple times, folks in the private sector, who knew me before and trust me, that sometimes I don't know and I'll say that, but that generally I have a perspective. And that was one of the more entertaining moments for me, was a bunch of sort of Seattle elite said, can you jump on a call? Sure. And that was the question. It was mostly men in suits. And somebody said, Amy, is homelessness a housing problem in Seattle? And I said, if you're talking about the folks that you see, on the sidewalk and under the bridge, no, that is not about housing. I said, we have a housing problem that is separate. And I talked about, too, the through line, that it's very hard to go from PSH to affordable housing to that is an issue. We have a bottleneck, but I am going to keep repeating it. These folks are not on the sidewalk because of, rent control or something like that. It is not that.
It is not that at all. And it's not, so we've started separating it and saying, there's a homeless population and there's what I would call a crisis population.
Right.
That crisis population are the groups that you interact with and that you take calls for, people with significant mental health issues, with substance use challenges, with all kinds of trauma, right? And again, 100% of the people that I have met that have worked with us, that have lived in our villages, 100% of them have trauma. 100%.
100%.
And 100% of them lack the resources to deal with that trauma. They don't have access to counselors. They don't have medical care. They don't, whatever. They don't have ID. I mean, basic stuff. They are people in crisis. And you can offer them housing until the cows come home, and you will not solve their problem with 4 walls and a roof. You won't. And I've been writing lots of articles about this lately.
Yeah.
You have to address the crisis issue and the trauma in order for the housing to be effective. Otherwise, what's going to happen is what we see today, which is hundreds of billions of dollars funneled into structures that do nothing for a person in crisis. Are they stabilizing for some people? Yes.
Yeah.
That is not the population I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And I think that what you see on the streets and what people associate homelessness with is the crisis population. There's a huge population of people who are homeless that are not that population. Those people typically have resources.
Yeah.
They have family and friends and people they can couch surf with. They're homeless, but you don't see them.
Yeah.
The population that we need to really address is this crisis population.
Right.
And it's massive. It's a massive group of people.
Right. Yeah. When I've talked to folks who sort of unwind what happened for me, it's often like I burned one bridge at a time, right? And so I keep seeing this thematically that people exhaust their network, their connection.
Yep.
I mean, we start with people generally, right?
Yes.
We start out with supports, and I've thought often, oh, if this was my son, he would have had this option, and these folks do not. Why does this rhetoric persist? Why? Honestly.
Yeah. Well, we're so committed to the narrative now that we can't possibly give it up, right? And what I will say is there's been a huge investment, financial and otherwise, right? Resources that have gone into this. And it's perpetuated here locally too. I mean, in everywhere. It's perpetuated at every level of government and every level of society. We have bought into this narrative that homelessness is a housing problem.
Yeah.
Did it start because we have not enough housing? Does the lack of housing perpetuate the problem? Absolutely. I'm not discrediting that at all. But what the public hears when they hear this narrative is build more housing, homelessness stops. Wrong. It's 100% wrong. We have to invest in services. You have to start with the people and the issue. And if you don't start with the person, the housing is useless. So we have affordable housing units all over this country. Seattle is not exempt from this, that are sitting empty.
Yeah, I know.
Because people get housing vouchers, they go to those apartments. They don't want to be alone. And at the end of the day, we humans, we were built for a relationship, for community with one another. We go find that community in whatever way we can. That's why you have gangs. That's why you have, right? I mean, you're a cop, you know this, right? Yeah. We gravitate towards community, good or bad, and belonging. So if we can create a place of belonging and a purpose and meaning for people that will drive them towards good, then we will win this game. But what we've done instead, especially in places like Seattle and up and down the West Coast, is said, oh, you want to live that way? Okay.
Yeah.
We can't stop you.
Right.
And what we're doing is sentencing people to death. And that's not appropriate. And even putting someone who's abusing substances or has significant mental health issues, putting that person into an apartment and saying, here's your key, I solved your problem, also a death sentence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I was just reading the rates at which people died by overdose when we brought them inside. I think COVID era, I wasn't here then, but I try to really focus on the moral imperative. It's a simple ethical tool to say, what would you want though? If it was you, or if this was your kid, what would you do? Because I challenge that notion. If my kid was using fentanyl, I would do anything. I know it's lethal. I know he's going to die. Yeah. And so I think we're so confused. We really went off course when we said, okay, I have compassion for this. I never say, Eric will say the addict. I've been trained not to do that, right? So a person with, always that person first language. I know. Yeah. I know. I'm just saying, I do understand what's behind that, but it's like having compassion doesn't mean you do nothing to break the self-destructive cycle.
That's right. That is totally true. And I will also say, as a family member of an addict,
oh, great. You just sided with him.
I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
I like it.
I like both. I'm a middle ground kind of gal. So what I will say is, as a family member of an addict, is that it's important to remember that, yes, when you have a child that you love or a family member that you love that's addicted, you will do anything to save them. And sometimes the thing that you need to do looks like accountability that says you can't stay here anymore, which is why we see people on the streets that are addicted, right? I mean, it's a common misperception that people go to the streets because of addiction. That does happen. The vast majority of people that we encounter across the country that are struggling with addiction became homeless first and then started using in response to that experience because it's traumatizing, or for women especially, they're trying to stay awake. They're trying to stay alert because of violence. I mean, we see that a ton. I could tell you some crazy stories from our pallet villages. But what I will say is it is okay for family members and communities to hold people accountable.
Yeah.
And we should. And when you talk to Patrick, when you talk to the Weld members, you will hear this. You do not get better without accountability. And it comes first from your community and then from yourself. But you cannot intrinsically embrace accountability unless someone has shown it to you.
Yeah.
And so we as a community have to start saying, look, we love you. We want you to get better. You can't stay here. It is not okay for you to live this way because you're hurting yourself and the community around you. That is okay. And that is the movement that we're starting to see now that we have at Pallet have been trying to elicit for years.
Yeah.
It's not, we don't agree with jailing people who are homeless and addicted. That doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
There is a subset of that population who needs a timeout. No question. And you can ask anyone who's recovered from addiction. There are people who need that. People need a place to sit down for a second, stabilize, connect with services. And that's what Pallet tries to provide.
Yeah. I remember the first village I visited, it felt like family camp almost to me, the way that it was set up. And I thought, oh, this is cool. Because what I keep hearing is you have to be repatterned, a lot of folks. If you've been living in any kind of antisocial way, whether it was in corrections or, crime and crisis over here, that you have to start behaving like a good neighbor. You have to learn how to interact with community, we're talking to a friend where I said, you should call me, if you're in crisis. He's spent his entire life in the system. Yeah. And he said, I don't even know how. I don't have that yet. And I was like, you better practice. Yeah. You just have to keep practicing. Yeah. And so tell me about that design, the services on site.
Yeah. So it's a requirement for us. So at Pallet, we have dignity standards that we require cities to meet. We work mostly with cities, counties, and states to set up these shelter villages with wraparound supports and care. We work closely with them to ensure that there are services on site. We don't dictate what those services are, but there has to be services of some sort. We don't just set up shelter villages and say, everybody move in, right? That doesn't help anybody. And if you think about the places, the systems that most of these people are coming from, whether it be another homeless shelter, the prison system, jail, whatever, there's structure in those systems, good or bad. Yeah. And when you go from no structure at all to lots of structure to total freedom, I mean, we see this with prison, with reentry, right? So Weld works with people that are exiting mostly prison, but also jail. And when you've lived, we have folks that have been incarcerated for 10, 20, 30, 40 years sometimes. Yeah. They come out, they don't know how to use a phone. They don't know how to use the bus system. They have zero digital literacy. So Weld is teaching them all of that. And I've seen grown men cry in the aisle at CVS when we say pick out a toothbrush. Yeah. And they're like, oh my God, I don't even know. They just issued me one for 40 years. What am I supposed to, literally weeping, like I don't know what to do. And if you think about it, a lot of people recidivate because they lack that access to structure. And as humans, we actually want some structure. We need it, right? It helps normalize us. It gives us boundaries. It's healthy. It's normal. Whether it's given to us the right way or not, we need it. Yeah. And so the Pallet villages are meant to provide some level of structure and support. So there's meals, there's services, there's opportunities.
It's funny that you mentioned that piece on structure, because when you think about societies, and particularly the West Coast and Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, our response to this idea of autonomy, like I have to, as an addict, I have to come up with the right answer, like without help. Like why? It's so funny that our families and our jobs and our the way that we live our lives provide structure for many of us. And then there's folks that don't have that experience with structure, and yet we're going to require them to operate outside of structure when you and I might not be able to do it without family and friends and the confines of those parameters, those lanes. But we want somebody who's addicted to a drug to exercise fantastic.
I would say
they're not going to.
It's not going to. And it's actually how we get to our current situation. Not that we're not. I think the tide's turning, and I mean things that you're doing are critical to that. But sometimes folks are really entrenched in the way that things have been. A. Yes. And B. Our funding mechanism is such that folks tweak the program to meet the funding requirements.
Yes.
And the funding requirements are often designed by bureaucrats that have been in the system forever that doesn't necessarily generate the iterative process where you learn and you
Is it working? Is it
tweak
working? We designed a thing. Are people getting better?
And then you come along, right? And you've got Pallet and Weld, and you're like, hey, maybe we can solve some problems here together. But talk a little bit about, and you've obviously had a variety of experiences in different political environments in 31 states and a bunch of different cities. Yep. What are some of the themes in terms of the process of breaking through that bureaucracy to get
stuff done?
Yeah.
Get stuff done.
Yeah, it's a great question. Before I answer it, though, I want to say one thing about the structure piece and this idea. One of the biggest issues we have in this country is we've gotten into this either or. It's a two-sided conversation, and we need to understand that it's a both and. Like, you have to have structure and not but, and you have to understand that not everybody's going to accept that structure in the same way. People are not data points. We love data in this country. We want data. We need data to give us a baseline. We're talking about human souls here that are evolving and growing and changing to the evolving world around them. And to say, oh, we have this blanket structure, procedural option here for you, and it's right for everybody is stupid. It's asinine. Like, we cannot sit there and go, every human is going to respond the same to this one intervention, right?
I have a theory of change.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And everybody is different, right? So I want to make sure I say that because there's so much of this. There's so much of this either or, and even the conversation we had earlier about housing, right? It's not housing or nothing. It's housing and. We need all of it.
And I will tell you, Amy, like, my education on the side never mattered to me. I never used that title, but I take it out for a spin now. Yeah. Because that is the first thing I learned. And it was only a few years ago. First day of that doctoral program. Anybody who says that you can establish causation when it comes to human behavior is very ignorant. And even correlation is incredibly limited. The other thing you learn is that all research is bought and paid for. Most of it never sees the light of day. There is always an agenda. There is. And so that doesn't discredit all research, but I think we've displaced what we know about what it is to be human.
Yes. 100%.
About our own motivation, how we raise our kids.
Yes.
Right? And so in one speech last year, I was like, we're mammals. And it was so funny because I was in an academic environment and people were like, you
might be right.
I had forgotten.
Oh, come on. Sorry.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
No, I try to make people choke in every episode.
No, you're fine. So to answer your, 100%. To answer your question, bureaucracy is the bane of my existence, 100%. And I will be very glad to speak to that. So
That's the name of this podcast.
Yes,
I feel like.
bane of my existence. Yes. So bureaucracy is what thwarts our ability in every way to address human need at the bottom line. And the reason is valid. So if I'm the government, which I work with lots of them, I have limited resources. And my best bet, understandably so, is to look at the data, look at the research, which, by the way, when you're talking about homeless folks, don't look at the research. It's completely invalid. All of it. 100% invalid. It's impossible to study transient populations. Impossible. So you got to start somewhere. We have our pit counts. Everybody in every city will tell you, that's wrong. Don't listen to it, right? But we have what we have.
Do you know what she's saying?
The pit count, point in time count. Yeah. So if you're talking to a governmental entity, they'll say, this is the information we have. We have limited resources. Based on the information that we have, we know that the best bang for our buck is to invest in this intervention, and therefore we will pay for it. And that's what we've done. The problem with that is no two people need the same intervention, and so it's not working, clearly. What we need to do now, well, maybe I'll save that for later. We didn't ask me about that. I know what we need to do now. But from a bureaucracy,
let's get there in a minute.
But the bureaucracy this is the basis of bureaucracy is I have resources, I have data, I match the two together, and I do it. And in order for me to pay for this, I need everyone and their mom to look at, sneeze at, sign off on this, right? Yeah. And the bigger the government, the harder that becomes. So the reality is, if we're going to respond to human need, which is immediate, we have to strip the bureaucracy away. And we know this works because during COVID, we gave money directly to cities without a bureaucratic process to do what they knew was best for their local community. Cities are on the front line of what's happening, and they have very little money and very in the big picture, A lot of cities have a lot of money. But in the big picture of things, they have very little money, very little authority, and they're the ones who are getting yelled at by their constituents. Yeah. And so the cities are out there saying, we know what to do. When we gave them money because we had to during COVID, we saw massive decreases in homelessness. We saw lots of people enter into treatment. We saw amazing outcomes that we never saw before. And it was because we didn't go through this bureaucratic process that we have now, which is federal government decides who gets what, goes to the state, goes to the county, and sometimes the city. And then we fight over who gets to play with it, right? It's a money issue. Bureaucracy is built off money.
Yeah, I always say every time a dollar changes hands, you've lost some of that dollar.
Yes.
And so even that pass through, I completely agree with that. And I often remind people we can change things. And I use COVID as the example. You can change things real fast.
Yeah.
Fentanyl, should that be a public health emergency? Yes, it should.
Absolutely.
Of course it should.
Of course.
Leading cause of death, right?
Right. I mean, it killed more people than COVID did, but we're not talking about it. We're not doing anything about that. And the reality is, like you said, when you think about housing, too, as an example, housing is incredibly expensive and takes a long time to build. My husband is a builder, market rate apartments. We built them for a third of the cost of what affordable housing costs to build. Explain that to me.
Yeah.
Right? And it's why? Because when you go to affordable housing, you go to build affordable housing, there's like 12 people at the table and they all have their hand out because they can't stay in business. Understand, I'm a business person. They can't stay in business if they don't have a cut of that dollar that passes through. So you have developer, financer, builder, service provider, government. That's 5. There's at least 3 more in there that are like helping pull the pieces together. It's great that everybody wants to help, but now you have 8 entities that need 10 to 20% to stay in business. You've now, do the math, marked it up by 120%, 160%, whatever the number is, right? And that's the reality of like, people are like, why are we spending so much money on affordable housing? Because it costs too much to build. Let the market rate builders build it. We can build it for a lot less. That's just one example of how bureaucracy just makes things more expensive and more time consuming.
So tell me your reaction. I feel like this is all being daylighted all the time in the national conversation. And I was telling Eric earlier, I don't know that I would have had an opinion on some of the rhetoric a few years ago before I was anywhere near bureaucracy. Right now, most of the critique I'm hearing, I'm like, that's right. That's right. There's, I think, a ton of waste at every level. I think 100%. We know what interventions work. We talk a lot about corrections, right? We see models where 30 months people have dramatically changed their lives and are rehabilitated. And then I've got a 30-year sentencing guideline for the, it just, none of it makes any sense, but we're not being reflective and reactive to what we know.
100%. Yeah. I mean, we have really old, antiquated rules and policies all across this country at every level of government. And we don't revisit those often enough. And then what we do, the things that we are legislating, I mean, I've been in multiple state houses of government in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And the things that they're legislating, I'm like, really?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about right now?
Yeah.
This
is a priority.
You want to legislate about that? Okay, that's fine. So I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but it's happening all over.
Fun.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, for you, maybe not for me. But it is like, it's true. The things that people get excited about, whatever, you get elected to be a legislator, you get that right. But we have a major crisis on our hands. We have people that are suffering and dying on our streets. And instead of focusing on that, we're focusing on silly things that don't matter. But from a bureaucracy perspective, it's everywhere. Waste is everywhere. Yeah. And I mean, the federal government is calling this out en masse, and they should be. It's one thing I very much agree with this administration.
Yeah.
There is a ton of waste. And I have said for a decade that as soon as I started digging into this locally in the Seattle area, the homeless industrial complex in Seattle is incredibly real. And in many cities up and down the West Coast, incredibly real. Every conspiracy theory that you've heard is true. Look at the news. Yeah. Look at San Francisco. I mean, they just ousted a whole bunch of service providers for too high salaries, parties, all kinds of crazy stuff that they're spending their money on when they should have been using it to help people. That is real stuff that is happening.
That accountability in government, that's we need that. We have to have that. But what is it that, from your perspective, from the person who's got a proven program that's helping people change their lives, and you're coming in and you're offering this to folks, what are the obstacles? I mean, again, I think that so many organizations tweak their their product to meet the funding guidelines,
yes.
right? And you have been like a thought leader and working alongside folks to design programs. So instead of trying to make your program meet the requirements of funding, you've said, hey, let's change the funding requirements to meet the actual program that provides results. So how have you been able to do that? And why don't others? What is the impediment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's true. I mean, most organizations will shift their narrative and their scope to match the funding. That's a survival tactic. Weld, as an example, when Weld started, we had Patrick and others at the table who had lived experience. I didn't know exactly what needed to be done. I said, you tell me what needs to be done. How do we actually help people? And they told me exactly. They gave me a whole lay of the land. This is what needs to happen. And I said, well, there's no funding. There's no funding for that, because funding at every level of government hits the bottom line, right? So when you talk about homelessness as an example, tons of funding for the crisis population into the wrong resources, by the way. But if you're the person in the middle here and you're about to become homeless or you've just become homeless, you're not homeless enough to qualify for funding, which is crazy. But that's right. It's a thing. It's a real thing. And so there's no funding there. And so they said, here's what we need to do. This is how we know this is how we change people's lives. And I said, great. There's no government funding for that. I can tell you that right now. And they said, shit, what are we going to do? Pardon my French. And I said, well, we need to go find people who believe in you and me and us and say, this is the right way. And we did. We found really amazing local folks. Rich and Sarah Barton. Rich Barton is the CEO of Zillow. His wife, Sarah, is incredibly involved in criminal justice reform work. She came along and said, I love what you're doing. I believe in you. We will fund this. Yeah. And that's the bottom line. You have to find the people who know and are willing to pay for it privately. That's the reality, because the government, up until recently, and they still haven't actually put their money where their mouth is. I think they're getting there. Yeah. I hope they're getting there. But we had to find private philanthropy and corporate sponsorship that said accountability matters. Yep. This model will work. We will subsidize it. And eventually the government followed that rule, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Well, I was always in that space, the nonprofit sector, usually kind of nimble nonprofits. And that was my favorite thing in the world. As fast as I could come up with a good hypothesis and test it, and a good funder who understood what I was doing. But again, it was my instinct. I'm actually trying to change lives here. Yeah. And I have learned people remember there were times that I gave grant money back. I was like, it's not working. We thought it would. It's not working. And so I long to return to that space, actually, because it was so meaningful to run that fast and to sometimes say. There was one interesting program that I was a part of. It was emergency sanctuaries. It was like kids getting split up as they enter foster care, 2 a.m. after a drug raid is what was happening all the time in those years. And it was like, we have got to at least get a thing where we can keep these kids together and give the state a minute to make a better first placement. Yeah. I had no precedent. There's no model. I was trained in all that shit. We do say that on this show.
Okay, good.
Trained in all of that. But what I knew, I had 4 young kids myself at that time. And what I knew was that it was morally reprehensible what we were doing, what we had designed the system to do. And I remember we had to get a new license, right? Because it wasn't a group home. It wasn't a thing. And I thought, well, of course we're going to get it because it's going to save the state money. I'm going to use private funding to make them look better. Right. And I was right about that. We got it. But then it was like, oh, geez, we need like $500,000. Yeah. And it was Modern Amy was born in that season, because I remember calling 10 funders, the same types of folks, saying, listen, I don't have time to go fundraise and to make a case for support and have 47 coffees. I want to try this. Yes. And then we will study it. Do we have a better first placement? Can we, minimize the trauma for these kids? And it was so cool. And also, I remember that time. Yeah. People changed and lined up fast when I had the moral imperative, right? Yeah. And there were people who actually cared about those kids more than anything else. Right, right. And if you match the impact with the dollars, you win there, right? But it's what you're saying is true. And what's hard about this is that the nonprofit sector is not sustainable. We know that, right? Yeah, I mean, it's by design. By design, it's not sustainable. There's not enough money to pay the people who work there enough. There's not enough money to fund everyone who's out there. Well, there's the overhead myth, right? Yeah, right. There is the overhead myth, which I hate, which is, you can't, it's the 80-20 rule, 80-20. 80% of the dollars have to go to the person and 20% goes to overhead. And if you go over 20, that, heaven forbid, you should do that, and then people pull their money. It's so dated. And this is IRS stuff. It's so dated. And it's this donor and funder mentality that says, I don't want my money going to the people changing the
salaries,
world.
But it's like, well, who do you think is actually doing the work? And by the way, if you don't pay them a living wage, they end up part of the population, right? This is, people know this, they understand it. But I'm actually a big believer in social enterprise, which is what Pallet is. So when we started all these companies, we actually made a point, and it was sort of an experiment, to be totally honest. You know, SquarePeg was a for-profit contractor. Weld is a nonprofit. Pallet is a social enterprise, which is a for-profit entity that has a mission that's funded through its revenue. So all three of them have had their set of challenges, no question. All three of them have had their way of operating in the world that creates sustainability. And the thing about human services that is so hard is we have shoved human services into the nonprofit world and said, if we're going to serve people, which, by the way, is what our economy is built off of, what our government is for. I mean, people are the source of everything we do. But everything we do to serve people is going to sit in the nonprofit world. That's not sustainable. And then we wonder why our services aren't working, and it's because the services stop and start, depending on funding availability.
Right.
Social enterprise allows for a for-profit, market rate solution that is fundable through revenue, and it continues, right, in its own way, and it has a different pot of funders. And you've seen there's a lot of these donors now. The Gates Foundation is a great example. They took a whole bunch of money. I don't remember how much. It's like 400 million or something like that, and took it out of the nonprofit world and put it into social impact investing, right? Yeah. And there's a reason, because then your dollar becomes $10 instead of I gave the dollar and it's now gone, right? Yeah. And Weld was built as a social enterprise, despite the fact that it's a nonprofit. They have internal revenue streams that we built in for that reason. And they generate, I think it's somewhere around 60% of their own revenue right now, which is great.
We have to incentivize results. So I got really interested in venture philanthropy when it became a thing, you know, because you got to see it. Actually, it was with the prison population. If you can prove that this works, and if you're getting better results, we're going to keep block granting you, right? You're going to get more and more. You're going to be able to scale. I don't think people understand you don't really have research and development in the nonprofit sector. You really don't. You have to get another funder to provide that. Because again, that inflates your overhead. Yeah. And then you actually lose your tax status. Generally, the best and brightest folks are not attracted to that space initially. Yeah. I only stumbled into it because I didn't think I was ever going to be the provider for my kids. Right. I was. Yeah. I was the only provider. And that was why I came to Seattle, was like, God, if I'm going to stay in this space and get paid at all enough to put these kids through college, I'm going to have to be so good, and I'm going to have to tie myself to revenue, to philanthropy, to administration, even though I'm really a programs gal. Right. But I knew I've got these MSWs, right, who are making half what I'm making just because I studied business. So that whole system, that's a whole separate podcast. But it does help you to understand why things got so bad. Yes. Because these are the most complex issues. Yeah. That's what we're talking about here. And we have outsourced the solutions to a sector who cannot possibly, by design, solve these problems.
That's right. That's exactly right. And there are some amazing nonprofits in the world, and there are also some really corrupt nonprofits in the world. That's right. And at the government, the highest government level, we made a massive investment in the nonprofit sector because it made us feel better about ourselves. And that nonprofit sector actually incentivized bad players and bad behavior. I mean, there's people in Pallet's world that are nonprofit that are just lining the pockets of their developer friends. I know it. Everyone else knows it. I mean, this is real stuff that's happening. And unless you know where to dig, you're not going to see it. Because accountability doesn't exist within that organization. Yeah. Right? And I will say, in some ways, like you think about Mackenzie Scott, right? An angel, an amazing human. And when she gives to organizations with no strings attached, that's a massive gift. Giving to organizations that are peer-led, like Weld and others that she has given to, and saying, look, you are the people who are closest to the problem. I trust you. Go and build what works. That is a gift that I cannot describe the impact of, right?
You know, I was at an organization that got one of the first block grants from her, $25 million. It was in the Midwest, and everybody thought I knew her, that it had something to do with me because I'm from Seattle. But I talk about that all the time because I was also the one to do the one-year report. Yeah. And what we were doing Black-led social change, a lot of really cool things, trying to close especially the child poverty disparity between Black and white folks in this region. And again, her team had studied who's doing what and what evidence do we have that it's working. And that was why we got the grant. I remember that report. It was like 3 questions in an email. Basically, what have you learned? What's going well? what do you wish you could do differently? And it took me like 5 minutes to write this email, and that's it.
Which is great
because don't take me off the front lines.
You should be running the business.
Yeah. But it's interesting because in the context of bureaucracy, the way that we think about oversight, it is the opposite of what contemporaries know, which is what McKinsey's doing. We think, no, we need more forms, we need more paperwork,
100%.
we need more metrics.
Right. And you say at the government level, we say we need accountability, but like I've done big NIH grants when I used to work at UW, for example. We had to hire 4 people just to report back to the federal government about what we were learning on that NIH grant. That was 4 FTEs worth of dollars that could have gone to providing medical care to underserved populations. But instead, we had to pay 4 FTEs to just put reports together for NIH on a regular basis.
That's the definition of bureaucracy.
It is. And then you provide that and you're like, did anyone even read that? Is there anyone there that even cares? But it's the process. We build these processes and procedures in the name of efficiency that are actually incredibly inefficient.
So here in the Great Pacific Northwest, we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on the homelessness issue only to have more homelessness. It's like we're marketing for more or something. So when we talk about this, the effects and the efforts of the nonprofits and the success in many cases of the nonprofit world, and we talk about the money being spent from the government, how do we marry those two? How do we get the government to actually fund things that actually work and get out of programs that, demonstratively fail?
Yeah.
We continue to fund stuff that doesn't work.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think there's two answers to this. One is, again, the narrative has been housing, structures, right? And I literally had a phone call on the way here to this conversation about how we're shifting away from capital assets to services, which is good. We have invested a lot in services, but not the right services. They're blanket services where we've said, okay, we know the majority of the population, like we talked about before, needs this intervention. We're going to put a bunch of money into that one intervention. Well, that helps that 20 people. But it doesn't help the 1,000 over here, right? And so we need to stop focusing on specific interventions and instead say, who's doing the good work, who's getting the right outcomes. And by the way, we don't have a good way to judge that right now. That's the biggest piece, right? Yeah. So we use this system in this country called HMIS. It is an absolute lump of garbage. It is the most useless data set I have ever seen in my life. And I'm a data nerd. I love data. That's my background. That's what I did at UW, lots of data stuff. And it is, yes, it's what we use. I do think that the federal government the current administration is interested in understanding how we can do better there, and that is encouraging to me.
Now, you were just in D.C., right?
I was, yeah.
Okay, so tell us about that.
Yeah, so I spent a little bit of time, limited amount of time, working with some officials at the White House as well as with the new HUD secretary, who is a lovely human, by the way. Scott Turner is his name. Very compassionate man, very understanding. It's a tough scenario because there's a lot of change happening, right? And with that change comes a halt in funding, which is essential to keep services going. So it's a little painful right now for a lot of people, and I want to acknowledge that, ourselves included. I do think that stopping what you do to understand if it's working and how it's working and then redirecting capital to where it needs to go is the right way, but there needs to also be an understanding that, like, there's a middle ground here where people are going to die because we're not funding things. And so I'm going back next week and I'm hoping to really drive that message home. Yeah. But I think that this effort to reduce waste and to look at corruption is the right thing to do. Is it being done the right way? I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert at that, so I don't know. Yeah. But we do need to look at the data that we can get. HMIS is not a good system. Yeah. We need to have boots on the ground. People who have the authority to make the decisions need to get their feet on the ground, look at what's going on, understand it, talk to the people who are impacted. They spend a lot of time talking to other electeds. Yeah, talk to the people who are experiencing help. They're talking to the wrong people, right? Yeah. And so I do think there's a challenge in that there's limited money. We know that across the board. I mean, the city of Seattle has a deficit. Every city that I talk to, for the most part, has a deficit. Yeah. Every state has a deficit except for a couple. There are a couple states that do not have deficits. But even those states are...
You thinking about moving?
Like, yeah.
Which one?
Texas. Texas is where you want to go.
Actually, Texas is on this list.
Yeah, so Texas has a lot of money. But what I will say is even those states are being smart and thoughtful and hoarding cash where they need to, and rightfully so, because there's a lot of concerns about market condition, and that all makes sense to me. In the meantime, we're talking about human lives here, and we're allowing people to die for things that are unnecessary, right? Yeah. So we need to look at what we have. We also need to look at the existing service providers and say, do you need to continue getting the money you're getting? That's a hard conversation to have. Nobody wants to have that conversation. No one wants to go to the lovely nonprofit that everyone thinks is wonderful and say, you get $50 million a year. Tell us how you're spending that. Yeah. Show us your outcome data. Don't show me your HMIS data. Show me the people. Let me see the people who you have allowed to move on to other things. And there are some of them that they couldn't produce those people. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And data is inferential.
It is.
And I think what we do is we just actually incent people to manufacture outcomes. When I talk publicly to people about what works, I'm saying just put this aside, think philosophically. Again, what is it to be a human?
Yes.
If this intervention is working, this person, wherever they started, they will be better off in 6 months if it works.
Yeah.
So I'm being asked a lot about diversion.
Yeah.
Right? And I was real quick to say with certain dependencies like fentanyl, you can't have a once-a-week outpatient appointment.
No.
I think when we talk about housing first, harm reduction, all of these things, often I like the framework, but we are not implementing actually what that theory was.
Yeah.
Harm reduction was meant to be directional.
Yeah.
I am never going to get behind the best I could want for you is Suboxone for life. I will never get behind that.
No, neither.
Because I believe that we should value people more than that.
Yes. I completely, I'm so glad you said that. Yeah. And it's hard because there are these blanket treatments that people say, oh, just do medically assisted treatment. And I'm like, no. And if you ask Patrick about it when he comes, he has a lot of feelings about this, right? Do people need that? Yes. Is it a good resource? Yes. Is it the right thing for everybody who's got substance use? No.
Yep.
And that's the challenge, I think, is that, again, it's easy to take a pot of money and say, here's the 3 things we will do.
Yeah.
You're not dealing with 3 people, you're dealing with 30,000 people.
Well, I mean, you've been talking about what works for this person might not work for that person. And I think what society in general wants is an easy answer. So you come up with your 3 best answers and throw money at that, and then you can go to dinner and think nice things about yourself.
That's 100% true. Right. And for the general public, for the constituents that are voting for the electeds who make these decisions, and let's be honest about that, right?
Yeah.
The biggest barrier to success with this issue is political will.
Yeah.
And for us, we face it everywhere. You have NIMBYism, you have all the things that you hear about and you think are coming and going. They're very real. They rear their ugly head all the time. People don't want to deal with the issue, but they want the issue dealt with.
Yeah.
Right? Well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. I'm sorry. You can't say, I don't want to see that homeless person on the street, but they can't live over there in that shelter.
Right.
Yeah.
And people are going to continue to scream that. It doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is that constituent pays for an elected, right? They vote for that person. That elected doesn't want to piss them off. And so they say, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and let you not do this, right? Let this shelter not be here, whatever. In a perfect world, so here's the perfect world scenario for me, okay? This is never going to happen. But we know the systems as we've created them in this country are broken. We know they don't work. And let me back up and say they're not broken. They're functioning exactly as they were designed to.
Yeah.
They were designed, like we get the outcome that we built. Yeah. We built a system that is incentivized to keep people down, whether we meant to or not. I'm not going to go there. That's a separate topic, debate for another time. The systems are working exactly as they were designed to, and we need to acknowledge that those systems are causing the problem. You can't explode a system that is providing services to people because people will die. So the only way to solve this is to build a parallel system that's better.
Well, that's my job, right?
I know. Yeah. And as you build that parallel system, the customers for the broken system stop coming. They start going over here. Yeah. And pretty soon there's no customers for the broken system and you can dismantle it. But everyone says, oh, blow up the system. You can't do that either. That doesn't work. Yeah. And in a perfect world, my healthcare background says, if we could just get people into stabilizing shelter and triage, right? Triage. You can't say, here's 10 people in an encampment. All 10 of those people need the same resource. You have to say, let's take these 10 people over here and put them in this stabilizing place. And let's have medical professionals and social workers and psychiatrists work with them and say, you have a fentanyl dependency. You need this. You have childhood trauma and other things that need to be dealt with. You are a domestic violence survivor. go over here, and we have resources for you over here. That is the most efficient way if we took a medical approach.
And you're talking about, I mean, that dovetails on what you're saying about housing too, right? I mean, just taking somebody and locking them, or giving them keys to a place doesn't provide any of those resources that you just discussed. And so it is truly the wraparound services approach. I mean, multi-dimensional response to the situation. But all of this stuff takes money. And what I really emphasize every chance I get is that it's costing us a lot of money right now to be ineffective. If we would just spend the money to be effective, in the long run, we're going to be spending significantly less money. Yes. So it's an investment in our own future, not only from a human perspective, but also from a financial one. So it's a literal win-win. It is. And there's again, it's a both and, it's not an either or conversation. It is true that people need a place to go in order to stabilize, right? And this is selfish because of the business that I'm in. But we have got to build more shelter. We have got to create a place for people to be, because you can invest in outreach teams all you want. I've been in cities over the last 2 weeks all across this country that are like, we're putting $50 million into a new outreach team. And I'm like, cool story, bro. How are the outreach workers going to find the people that they're trying to provide services to? These are transient populations, and you have sweeps going on, people moving around. So you're going to invest $50 million for someone to walk around and talk to somebody that they can't find the next day.
Yeah.
Right.
What a waste of money.
Yeah.
Put people in a place where you can find them every day and you understand what their needs are. And pretty soon you have success. I mean, at Pallet, we have 135 sites. More than 60% of our residents move on to sustainable housing, and they stay there. Yeah. Wow. Why? Because they know where they're sleeping every night. They have a place to leave their things. They're willing to come inside because they can bring their partner, they can bring their pet, they can stay with their stuff, and they feel safe and like they're part of a community. And their service providers know where to find them. They have an address. Mm-hmm. They can use that address to apply for jobs. I mean, these are things that most people who are housed aren't thinking about. They don't realize my address allows me to apply for apartments, for housing, for jobs, for whatever, or even just get my license back. You can't walk into the DMV and be like, I need my license. Oh, but I don't have an address.
Right.
Yeah. They won't give it to you.
No.
So most people don't know that if you haven't experienced being unhoused. And so if we can just get people into a place of stabilization, consistently access those services, then they will move on.
Yeah,
they want to. No, I've not met a single person in this country, not one homeless person who said, I don't want help. And there's that narrative too, who's like,
oh God,
people don't want their help.
I have spent more hours on that, convincing electeds all over the place. Like, people decline. Why? There's always a reason. And Eric's heard me say it. I have never heard the why, or gotten to the bottom of it where it didn't make sense. Yeah. That thinking makes sense to me. So even if I'm like, oh, that's misguided, it does make sense why I would think that. Yeah. I was talking to a woman recently who had been offered shelter, but also had been raped in that shelter before. Yeah. Yes. I was like, I actually feel safer here. And I felt like, I would too.
It's 100%. And we invested a ton of money into congregate shelters. Yeah. Nobody wants that. It's true for disaster too. Yeah. I mean, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars with the Red Cross, who I love, by the way, amazing organization. They do what they call hots and cots. Yeah. Storm hits. You fill up the Superdome post-Katrina with people. Oh my God, what a disaster, right? Yeah. There's children being abducted. There's rapes happening. And people see that on the news. And then storm comes to their town and they go, oh, I don't want to go to that shelter. I'm afraid, right? Yeah. That's true for homeless people as well. It's just a different storm. A poverty addiction storm has hit your town. And the people who were impacted go, no, I don't want to go to your crappy congregate shelter. I'm afraid of getting sick. I'm afraid of getting raped. Those are valid reasons that those of us that are housed would have if we had to go to the Superdome.
Yeah.
Right.
I really think underneath all of this, we were just in D.C. also, and we were at the Smithsonian, and I was, I love American history. Mm-hmm. And the thought that occurred to me was like, we just have not come very far actually in some regards, that we have these puritanical roots. Yeah. We were punitive. I mean, you think about good person, bad person, that sorting, that is underneath all of these systems and was still going on at the first part of the 20th century, still demonstrably. And this bootstraps idea, it does persist. Yeah. Because I'm in conversations with, privileged folks like us.
Yeah.
And I can hear it's like, well, but what choices did they make? Or why don't they just make a different choice? Or they're choosing to decline shelter. And I feel like that is still fundamentally a bootstraps idea.
It is.
If the person tries hard enough and makes another choice, then maybe we'll help them. And it's weird because I hear it on the left far more than I hear it on the right these days.
I do too.
I also think it's a bootstraps idea, though, that you provide a person the opportunity to, with wraparound services, to get the license, to have an address. I mean, you're allowing them a bootstraps opportunity. Wow. It's just, so it is still bootstrapsy. It's just,
let's make bootstrapsy
it's a new word.
Yeah,
it's a new, but it's acknowledging the fact that there's impediments to people pulling themselves up.
Yeah.
And again, we're asking the people least equipped to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, to pull themselves up by the
impossible
bootstraps.
To navigate.
It makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's true. And the hard part is, like, it's same as you. There's so many people that I've talked to across this country who have some of the wildest stories that I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And like Carolyn from Weld,
Yeah.
amazing story. And every time I hear her story, I think, if I was you, I would be dead.
Yep.
I do not have the resiliency as a human
Yep.
to withstand what you withstood and are standing here today helping other humans who come behind you.
One of the things
that's not a bootstraps thing. And if you look at people like, yes, did she make good decisions? Yeah. She's just a superhuman. Like, and if most
She's
people who are homeless and recovered from addiction are superhuman. And they have made choices that not everybody can make right out of the gate, but they will if they're given the right basis to survive.
And we have seen that over and over and over again. And the people that we're talking to that formerly incarcerated, formerly addicted folks, they're people that have some of the highest integrity and authenticity of anyone that we know.
Yes.
From the most successful folks around in boardrooms and executives and this and that. You talk to these folks that have been through that and have made changes in their life because they had to be introspective and they had to make significant changes. They have more integrity than a lot of the folks that are wildly successful that I know.
Yeah, and they also don't have the same level of resources, right? So when you look at a person like Carolyn as an example, or I mean, I've met tons of people from those scenarios. They don't have the same personal network of people that someone from a privileged community might have. They don't have the same financial resource, right? Yeah. So I always say, and I've heard this from lots of people across the country, homelessness is poverty is relationship poverty and financial poverty. Yeah. It's both of those things. You don't have the financial resources to come out of it. If I'm someone who's privileged and I lose my housing, I like LA. Yeah. LA is a great example. Yeah. City, 2 neighborhoods in the city just burned down in contrast to each other. A very expensive neighborhood, Palisades, and Altadena, which is a lower income neighborhood. All the Altadena folks currently living in hotels have no idea what they're going to do, had no insurance. All the Pacific Palisades people also had no insurance, by the way, because they all vacated from California. Different topic. And
so many podcasts.
But so many podcasts. But they have a ton of money. Not all of them, but a lot of them have plenty of money. So what do? They use their resources and their network and their friends and their relationships. They're staying with family. They're in Airbnbs. They're doing all kinds of things. Why? Because they're not impoverished financially or relationship-wise. Other people are. And this is the problem when you talk about low-income housing too, right? So this is probably another topic for another time too, but we need to build more housing. Everyone's focused on low-income housing. I hate LIHTC. That's the first time I've ever said that publicly. I think it's the most useless waste of resources I have ever seen. Why? Because what you're doing is you're incentivizing the construction of trap housing. That's exactly what most low-income housing is. Now, I'm not going to, I've been to some low-income housing communities that are wonderful and amazing. Over time, there's no money to maintain those units. They fall in disrepair. They're in poor neighborhoods. And predatory behavior is drawn to low-income housing. Yeah. And we love to talk about, oh, we're doing all these amazing things in the city. Look at all these low-income housing communities we're building. You just put out an OPB for everybody who's a predator to come to that community. They're not surrounded by people who have networks and resources to help them. Yeah. When I was growing up, my family had connections in our neighborhood. They helped me get internships and into college and That's how privileged people survive.
Well, I remember the first time doing the FAFSA for one of my kids, I was like, Jesus, I'm I have a lot of letters and I cannot navigate this form.
Yes.
And do you know Nicole Alexander?
Yes.
Yeah, I love Nicole.
Her.
But
Amazing
one of my favorite quotes, when we were just doing some outreach together, she said, Amy, paperwork is a root cause of homelessness.
It is.
And it made me laugh, but I thought it is true. It's so hard to navigate this system.
Yeah. And if you have someone who can help you.
Right.
And that's how most of us get by in life. But if you don't have that.
Yeah. My kid's at Pepperdine, my younger daughter. Mm-hmm. And so it was interesting during the wildfires, her boyfriend's very privileged as well. And so they went up to Santa Barbara and stayed in a little hotel,
Like you do.
That his father arranged. We give her such a bad time, because we're like, we're so sorry for you, Anna. Yeah. That looks terrible. But again, that is privilege, right? Is. I mean,
and it's real. And look, we're all the same, but we are not the same.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
Like humans are humans. We're all the same. And we all have the same struggle to survive and thrive. But at the end of the day, we have different resource allocations that we're allowed.
Yeah.
And that's based on who we know. It's just the truth. I mean, you talk to any billionaire in this country and they'll tell you, I knew people. Yeah. That's just the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all about your network.
Even, it's interesting because I was from trades folks, right? Construction folks, but I was a good pianist. Mm-hmm. And because of that, the classical study, I got pulled into these circles where I learned all the social norms, right? What was polite? How did I dress? What do you do in this space? And it really informed who I became later, that exposure. I want to know, what do you think about like public opinion, popular opinion? There's so many things where I feel like I don't know who tweeted what, but I see electeds catering to these popular opinions, which are not premised in anything real at all.
Yeah.
And sometimes, people ask me if I'd ever get involved, if I'd ever run. And I always say I would never do that because I don't want to cater to public opinion. But I see that as a major issue in this country, that people who are anchored in a morality that is evergreen do not want to go near that space.
Yes.
Now, there are exceptions, obviously. Yes. I know some electeds I really admire. But there's so many things I'm talking about where initially, I'm so candid in these forums. And I remember somebody saying, well, why does it look like this? And I went back to, Ricky's Law and involuntary treatment, and we do prioritize autonomy, and, was giving a real answer to the question. And one of my friends in government was like, Amy, you cannot talk about that stuff. You cannot. And I was like, but I can't answer the question otherwise. Yeah. But they thought, that's going to be a fall from grace. You're nobody's going to listen to you. Nobody's going to like you if you address that part of it. And so it's been fun because I feel like it hasn't hurt me, that candor.
Yeah, I think you and I are very alike in that way. My husband always says to me that I'm a person who can't be bought. And I'm like, what does that mean? But the more I think about it, I'm like, that's right. Like, I'm a person who doesn't care about money. Yeah. And I will tell the truth as I see the truth, even if it means that you don't like me. Yeah. And it makes some people like me and it makes some people not like me. And I just don't care. I'm unique in that way. There are a lot of people who care about the public perception. I'm not one of those. Yeah. But it's true. I mean, that's if you're an elected official, the way that you stay in your role is to continue to be elected. We have incentivized them to respond to public perception rather than doing what they was intended for them to do, which is be a public servant and do what the public actually needs.
And inform the public.
And sometimes what the public needs is not what the public wants. It's like parenting, right? How many times with your kids have you been like, this is not going to make me popular with you, but I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to be your mom. I'm here to teach you how to be a good human. Yeah. And the government is designed to govern. Yeah. But over time, the government has become community because we no longer go to church. We no longer have community in all these places where we used to have it. Right or wrong, it is what it is. Yeah. And we're all on our phones and we're not working together as people and as a society anymore. And so the government has had to step in because no one else will and engage in these societal issues. But I do think part of what this current administration is talking about and doing around culture wars is it's a tough conversation and no one wants to have it. Yeah. But I agree with them. Like, the government is not meant to decide your culture for your community. Yeah. We are here to govern. We're here to tell you what's right and what's wrong. And then you as a community decide everything that's in the gray area, which is the majority of human behavior. Yeah. How do we deal with that? Yeah. And you do that at the community level. You don't do that at the government level, right? Yeah. So it's hard because they are responding, though. And you see the majority of elected positions have evolved into this public perception.
Well, and the parties are so cultish,
conundrum.
I feel like, at this point. And it is interesting to talk to people privately, and they're completely aligned with me, and then to see what is said publicly in different spaces. And I feel like I'm always trying to maintain this is not political. When we're talking about human suffering,
it shouldn't be political.
Yeah, it cannot be. It cannot be. I think if we agree the person's life has value, I love your healthcare background because that really informs my thinking as well. Yeah. I think in terms of what course of treatment is going to work.
Yeah.
Let's try one. Is it working? It's not. Then we're going to try something else.
Yeah. And I think I just want to encourage you and say you should keep saying what you need to say, whether people like it or not. Like, will you have a fall from grace? Maybe
100%.
I'll hire you if you do.
I'm trying so hard.
The reality is like, and the thing is like the next generation. Like I look at my 18-year-old, and I know you have teenage kids too, and all that too. But like I look at my 18-year-old, and all she cares about is authenticity and honesty.
Yeah,
and
isn't that cool?
They're going to save the world.
Yeah.
Her generation is going to save the world.
I think so
They don't care what color your skin is. They don't care what your background is, your sexual preference. She doesn't care about any of that. She cares about who you are as a person and what you say and how you present. And that fuels me to be like, you know what? She's watching. Yeah. And I need to tell the truth. And her generation, I'm in front of them, and I want them to hear the truth. And if it means I fall from grace and everyone hates me, okay, she'll still love me. That's all that matters. We need to refocus on what matters. Yeah. Who cares if the public doesn't like you? Yeah. Your kids are watching you.
That's right.
So keep saying it. And that's we need more people like you that are willing to come out and speak the truth and give the history of what happened, or we're never going to know how we got here. And we can't fix a problem we don't know the origin of.
Right. The origin of this podcast actually was, becoming friends with these guys. They heard me do a different podcast, and we became friends. And at one point, they were like, Amy, nobody's reading your LinkedIn white papers. You know, like if you actually want to influence thinking, you need to be able to speak plainly. Right. But we have, between us, we've got 7 grown kids. About half are married or partnered up. And man, it's hopeful when we're around them. Because you've got quite a range of perspectives, but they love each other. They're wonderful people, and they're sincerely trying to figure out, okay, clearly this doesn't work. What might? Yeah. And so I think for kids, 18 who grew up in this really chaotic time where everybody thinks they have the facts, right? And that we are right and this person is a villain. Mm-hmm. I think what it's compelling them to do is go, okay, let's reset. Yeah. Right. What are we trying to do here? Yeah. And what evidence do we have that this works?
Yeah. And it's like, for me, I'm not a Republican. I'll say it. I'm not a Republican. I'm a Democrat. I have been my whole life. Do I think this Republican administration is doing a lot of crazy things? Yeah. Do I think they're doing more good things? Yeah, I do. The Democrats are going to come get me now. I know they are. But it's true. It doesn't, just because you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat doesn't mean that I can't agree with how things are shifting.
Totally. One of the things that we value, and again, one of the genesis ideas about doing this podcast is Amy and I have very, very different perspectives on a variety of issues, on most issues.
I'm so often so right. And
often. So I'm wrong a lot. I'm wrong a lot. But nevertheless, what's really interesting is that we can find so much common ground if we sit down and talk. And what you just said, you know how many people are afraid to say what you just said? I know. But people are unfriending their lifelong friends on social media because they disagree with you politically. Well, that's one of the entire points of this podcast is that two people can have wildly different perspectives, but still find a lot of common ground in the middle. And at the end of the day, we all kind of want the same things. And so if we can focus on that and then figure out what works and just the authenticity. And I think, it's encouraging to hear that your that's how our mind thinks, because that's the pathway to success in the future is to seek authenticity and not get your news from TikTok,
right.
But you gotta dig into the meat of the matter a little bit more and understand that people that with differing perspectives might have some value to you as well. I mean, Amy, because we view things through different lenses, I learned so much from listening to her perspective, and she learns a lot more listening from mine.
I'm sure she does.
She does.
I have learned a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like we were talking about before, right? It's the either or versus both and, right?
Yeah.
And it's you can be a Democrat and believe that Republicans are good people. And I grew up in the evangelical Christian community, who is a little embarrassing right now. I'm being real honest, right? That's the community I grew up in, and I spent all my college career challenging my own belief system to the extent that I love Jesus. I'm here for all the things, and I don't think he agrees with what y'all are doing. And I'm going to say it. We can still sit down and have the conversation. I still talk to the pastors who raised me who don't agree with me, and I don't agree with them. We talk on a regular basis.
Yep.
I was talking to someone last week about, and they made an Old Testament reference, and I was like, I'm kind of a New Testament gal, actually.
It can all be true, right? You can believe what you believe, and I believe what I believe, and we can still coexist in the same space without wanting to kill each other. And that's what's wrong with our government right now, is they can't exist without killing each other. And we do need to say, y'all need to get your act together. Stop acting like children.
Exactly.
You be here to govern. That's what you were elected to do. Do your damn job.
And we're not looking at policy anymore. We're just looking at who brought the proposal forward. So Eric showed me the other day, I hadn't watched it since it happened, but did you see Jon Stewart's testimony to Congress? When oh God, I'm going to send you this. It's probably the most powerful 10 minutes in any political context I've ever seen. But he's calling out, he was defending that there's not appropriate health care for 9/11 first responders. And this was like 18 years later, right? Or 15 years later. But he ends it with, they did their job, you do yours. Yeah. And it is so powerful. Right. And so I feel like we have got to get back to that we, the voters, we choose who we elect. Yes. You know, and like I'm very entertained by Fetterman right now and people like that because I'm like, I think the Democrats aren't paying attention to, we like that guy.
I mean, I hope they are. I totally agree with you. And it's tough to watch. And like I said, I've been, this whole month, I've been traveling at the state and the federal level, and it's a shit show out there, guys. I'm going to be honest. It's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed to be an American. I'm going to say that out loud. I'm embarrassed at what we've done. We need better leaders that will stand up and tell the truth and will do what society needs. And we need people to elect those people. We need the public to say, I want the problems solved. I may not agree with the way you want to solve them necessarily, but I believe you will solve them. We need to elect the people who will get the job done and not just fight about stuff. Right now, it's just a fight everywhere.
So, what do you want us to know as we leave this podcast? What is the single most important thing from your perspective to overcome bureaucracy, to get through the red tape, to make meaningful change? What is the thing that we need to know?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, at the end of the day, the bottom line for me has always been, you need to talk to the people that are at the core of the problem that you're trying to solve, right? Go. So, and this, I'm talking specifically about the issues we've been talking about, homelessness and addiction and all those things. There's too many people without experience creating solutions, and that is just 100% wrong. We need to elect people with lived experience, which happens all the time, by the way. They deserve to be in positions of power, and they should be, not just bring them to a task force and listen to them for an hour and say, I listened to them. That's bullshit. Yeah. You need to actually give them jobs, put them in positions of power to make moves. And we need to put them at the center of the decision making. Yeah. That's the bottom line for me. From a bureaucracy perspective, we have to realize that process is the enemy of efficiency. And I'm a business person, right? I mean, we're going through this, Pallet's a startup. And we go through this cycle in the company all the time where we have people that come in and say, well, in order for us to get more efficient at Pallet, we need more process. And I'm always the one who's like, and also, if we don't innovate, we will die. Yeah. You have to, both can be true. Yeah. We have to be willing to accept competing priorities. Yes, process is important. And if you don't embrace innovation and you don't move forward, considering the current state of affairs, and you're so committed to this process, this will never get done. This is why they're breaking FEMA down, right? FEMA has become this giant, archaic thing that does no good in the world because it's just this giant process machine that never spits anything out. Right. Process can become the enemy, right? Yeah. And the pursuit of perfection is the enemy of progress. Yeah, agree. No solution is going to be perfect. Just do something. I so badly wanted to say the F word in there, but I didn't. No, I'm so proud of myself. Too. Yeah. You just do something. We're so busy researching and trying to figure out what the right thing is. Like, stop it. Stop that. Yeah. Just do something. See if it works. If it doesn't, stop doing it. Do something else. But don't do nothing in the name of trying to find the perfect thing. I know you say that too.
No, I have actually never heard anyone speak more in alignment with the way that I speak. I think you're more entertaining than I am. But yeah, that's what I say.
I don't think so.
But even academically, it's the PDSA cycle, right? It's like you're supposed to be iterating. And there's a really important principle that generally once you have 60% of the knowledge you need, you go to act.
Yes.
And so, even with the alternative response pilot design, that took me like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It did, because I knew I wasn't going to know what we needed until we got out and started doing the things.
Yes.
So you have a basic hypothesis, a basic theory, and then you go study it.
Yes.
And so even the first time I did like the budget hearing, somebody asked me what I was going to need in 2 years for a pilot I hadn't launched. And I was like, I have no idea. I'll let you know. Ask me in 6 months. I'll let you know what works. But I wasn't going to escalate commitment to a theory that I hadn't even tested.
That's an aberration on the public sector. I mean, that's a private sector approach, and you're utilizing it in a public sector application. But that's a lot of the bureaucracy that we're talking about. Things get bogged down in the process and the bureaucracy and the paperwork and the red tape. And so, and then by the time you've produced something, you've watered it down so much because you've spent all of that kind of money on the administration of it, that your product suffers for it. And so you obviously, I'm a huge fan, not only your husband,
still?
But still.
Happy for you. That's good.
Things are going well. But to be able to bring that sort of willingness to iterate in government, in the public process, is what we need more of.
Yeah. And it's unusual, right? Like I work with governments all across this country, and they're like, I can't tell you how much money gets spent on task forces and research projects and what I call the talking heads. I say this all the time. Every time we see some process that's going on in some community, I always look at my staff and say, do you know how many people they could have housed for the amount of money they put into this little game that they're playing where let's sit around and talk about it? That's a cool story, bro. People are dying while you're talking about it. Right. We need to start saying that out loud.
Yeah,
and
your
wife is doing you're doing that, right? Like just get out there and fucking do something. Yeah. And we have at the federal level, we have all of these. I mean, I know it's hard and I understand it's like this. I don't want to be, this is going to sound bad. We're laying off workers and it's really hard and people are losing their jobs. And I hate that. There are so many people employed at the federal level and so many agencies and task forces and groups of talking heads that we pay to sit around and talk about what the next best thing is. And I'm like, we could have housed everybody in America for the amount of money that you spent on conferences and conversations. And I don't even go to them anymore. Yeah. I'm like, I'm not going to your conference. Get out there and help somebody. Right?
Yeah. No, exactly right. There was one meeting early on that I was in, and I remember, and it was again everything that I hate. It's like, let's define this for an hour. It's that kind of thing. But I started looking around, realizing who was in the room, and it would have been the highest paid bureaucrats. Like the 30 of us, thinking about what that meeting cost the taxpayers. And again, I think this is what the country's responding to right now.
Yes.
I think a lot of people know that. And I texted one of my friends in the meeting and said, I feel like we could at least be making sandwiches while we're talking about this. Yeah, it just frustrates me. But I've just declined to go now. I just do.
Yeah,
I have lots of meetings or quick huddles. Most of the work is by Teams or email. Yeah. And we're out working.
Yeah. So. And as it should be, right? And I think it's just
public service.
It's
so
it's so
two
hard.
Amy's are saying, let's get shit done.
Yes.
Let's quit messing around.
That's always been my mentality.
Yeah,
I mean, with Weld, we said, we don't know for sure if it's going to work. Let's put our boots on the ground and
try.
Prove it. And then we'll go ask people to pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about several topics that during this conversation that we thought could be podcasts of their own. So we're going to have you back for sure.
Good.
This has been fantastic.
Well, this is my therapy too.
Same.
It's
very therapeutic.
Amy squared here.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. But thank you so much for coming.
Thanks
we
for
really
having me.
appreciate this conversation. And it's really, really important for folks to understand because this is solvable. Homelessness is solvable.
100%.
The addiction crisis is solvable.
Yes.
We just got to get after it and get to work.
Yeah, I agree. We say at Pallet all the time, we believe this will be solved. I always say this, I believe this can be solved in my lifetime. It requires political will and investment. Yeah. We have the resources. We just need to do it.
Well, see that you share that with this Amy too. Constant positive outlook.
Yeah.
Again, he
optimism.
says I'm delusional, but
Listen,
No.
If we don't believe we can get there, we never will.
We won't. Yep. I say that often.
Yeah, you have to believe it if it's going to
So are you convinced?
I'm the most optimistic guy you know.
I don't believe you.
So the cop.
But that was nice. Yeah.
All right. And now you've been bombarded.
Yeah.
The Bombardened podcast is a Barden Squared production. Executive producers are Eric Barden and Amy Barden, and video and audio production of the Bombardened podcast is by Thread Theory Creative.